It was the kind of night where the wind whispered secrets, and the trees cast long, clawed shadows across the empty streets. In the town of Black Hollow, Halloween wasn't just a holiday, it was a warning. No one stayed out after midnight, no one spoke about the house on Sycamore Street, and no one, under any circumstances, answered when they heard their name being called from the dark. That's why when 17-year-old Sarah Montgomery disappeared on Halloween night, the town fell into silence. Some whispered she had been taken by the forgotten souls, the spirits of those who died in the cursed house. Others said she was lured by the voice, a voice only she could hear. But the truth was far worse. Sarah wasn't supposed to go out that night. Her little brother Jake had begged her to stay home. He was only 6, and Halloween scared him. "Please, Sarah, don't go," he had whispered, clutching his stuffed rabbit. "I had a bad dream. You were screaming, but I couldn't find you." She smiled, ruffling his hair. "It's just a dream, buddy. I'll be back before midnight, I promise." Jake watched from the window as Sarah walked down the street, her pumpkin-shaped candy bucket swinging by her side. The streetlights flickered, and for a moment, he thought he saw something behind her, a tall, dark figure standing near the old Sycamore house. But when he blinked, it was gone. Sarah never came back home. By morning, the town was in chaos. Sarah's parents searched everywhere. Her friends swore she had vanished without a sound, and the police found only one thing: her phone lying in the middle of Sycamore Street, still recording. When they played the audio, the entire room fell silent. A soft, chilling voice whispered, "Sarah." Then came the sound of her breathing, fast, panicked, the shuffle of hurried footsteps. Then her voice trembling, "Who's there?" Silence. And then a low, rasping voice that didn't belong to any living thing, "I've been waiting for you." A blood-curdling scream tore through the speakers, and then nothing. Sarah was gone. The town held a vigil, but no one truly believed she would be found. Not in Black Hollow. The missing never came back. But 2 weeks later, on a cold November night, Jake woke up to the sound of his sister's voice. "Jake, help me." Trembling, he turned towards his closet. The door was open just a crack, and inside, in the suffocating darkness, he saw a pair of pale hands, fingers twitching. He screamed, stumbling back. His mother rushed in, turning on the light. The closet was empty. But when she held Jake, rocking him to calm his sobs, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. On the wall, written in smeared blackened letters, were the words, "She is still here." The next night, Jake woke up again. This time, it wasn't Sarah's voice he heard. It was something else. "You can still save her, Jake," it whispered. He turned, heart pounding. The stuffed rabbit Sarah had given him lay on the floor, its button eyes staring at him. Then, in the dim glow of the streetlight outside, he saw something. A shadow standing in the corner of his room, not moving, not breathing, watching. And then, the whisper again, curling into his ear like ice, "But you have to come to the house." Jake clutched his blanket, tears streaming down his face. Sarah was lost, but now something wanted him. The town had tried to forget about the Sycamore house. They had burned it down once, but the house, it always came back. And now it was waiting. Jake had to make a choice. Ignore the voice and risk losing Sarah forever, or step into the house that had stolen her away. But there was one thing he didn't know. Sarah wasn't alone in there anymore. Jake stood in front of the Sycamore house. His small fingers clutched the stuffed rabbit Sarah had given him, its worn fabric damp from his sweaty palms. The house loomed over him, its charred wooden beams creaking in the wind, despite the fact that it had burned down years ago. But here it was, whole, standing, waiting. The door was ajar. A whisper curled through the air, soft as the wind, but laced with something far darker. "Jake, come inside." He should have run. He should have screamed. But when he heard his sister's voice, weak and trembling, calling from the darkness, "Jake, please help me," he stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him. The house smelled of old wood and something rotten underneath. The air was thick, pressing against Jake's small body, making it hard to breathe. He clutched the rabbit to his chest, his heart hammering. "Sarah?" His voice barely escaped his lips. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Dim candlelight flickered from the walls, though there were no candles. The house was breathing, each creak of the floorboards like an exhale, each gust of air like a whisper against his skin. Memories clawed at him, Sarah tucking him in at night, making shadow puppets on the wall, promising she'd never leave him. But she had, and now she was somewhere in this house, alone, hurting, waiting for him to find her. A loud thud echoed from upstairs. Jake jumped, his breath catching in his throat. Something moved in the darkness above. Then, another thud. Louder. Closer. A shadow loomed at the top of the staircase, shifting, stretching, its arms too long, its fingers twitching, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its mouth opening impossibly wide. Jackie! His scream never left his throat before. Cold hands shot out from beneath the stairs, grabbing his ankles, dragging him down. The floor beneath him split apart, opening into a gaping black void, and he fell, tumbling into a darkness that swallowed his screams. When Jake's eyes fluttered open, he was lying on a cold, damp floor. He was underground. The room smelled of wet earth and something decayed. Then he heard it. A soft, weak whimper. "Sarah?" His voice cracked as he turned, his body shaking. And there she was. She was sitting in the corner of the room, her back pressed against the wall, her long black hair covering her face. Her clothes were torn, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was shivering. "Sarah!" He scrambled toward her, wrapping his arms around her. She was so cold. Too cold. "Sarah, I'm here," he whispered. Her breath hitched. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes, they weren't Sarah's eyes. They were black, hollow, empty. And then she smiled. Not his sister's smile. Something else was inside her, and it was smiling at him. "Jake?" The voice came from behind him. Jake froze, because Sarah, the real Sarah, was standing in the doorway. Tears streaked her face, her body trembling. "Jake? That's not me." A cold, sharp pain shot through his chest. He turned back to the figure in his arms. It was still smiling. And then it lunged. Jake barely had time to react before darkness slammed into him, the world twisting, his body thrown backward. He crashed against the wall, his vision blurring. The thing that looked like Sarah stood up, its body jerking in unnatural spasms. Its fingers stretched longer, its skin peeling away like old paper, and then it whispered, "You should have never come here." And everything went black. When Jake woke up, he was no longer in the house. He was in his bed. His mother was shaking him awake, her voice frantic. "Jake! Jake! Wake up!" He sat up, gasping, his heart racing. It was a dream. It had to be a dream. But then his fingers touched something cold on his arm, and when he looked down, his breath stopped. A deep, blackened handprint was burned into his skin, and in his ear, barely a whisper, "I found you."